you definitely have a responsibility to your partner and your children. Okay, so your responsibility to your children, as far as I'm concerned, is it's twofold. One, don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. And there's a corollary to that, which is don't be an idiot. So that's partly why you need a partner, because your partner has to tell you when your demands on your children are excessive, because you're kind of, you're not 100% oriented properly. But still, you're their target adult. And so it's up to you to help them choose a path that makes you want them to be around. Right? And that's your critical responsibility. And hopefully, you're enough of an analog of the broader community so that if they can figure out how to get along with you, it radically increases the probability that they'll be able to get along with everyone. So for example, if you're playing with your children, 2 years old, you help them, you encourage them to play in a manner that's fun. And if you get that down, then, when you introduce them to another child, they'll know how to play in a manner that's fun. And so great, you've solved the problem. The problem is to get your child to enter into the collaborative social world. And so yes, you have a primary responsibility for that. And then with regards to your partner, here's something to think about with regards to roles. So my wife and I have had this discussion many times, and one of the discussions is, well, how are we to treat each other in public? And it isn't, her name is Tammy, the discussion isn't how should Jordan treat Tammy in public, or how should Tammy treat Jordan. That's not the discussion. This isn't personal. It's how should a wife treat her husband, and how should a husband treat his wife. It's impersonal. And it's partly, you don't put your partner down in public. Why? Well, it's not because you're hurting that person's feelings. That's not why. It's that you're denigrating the relationship that you are in voluntarily. And some of the most painful days I've ever spent, one in particular I spent with a group of men who had been in therapy for their marriage, and who bloody well needed it, I can tell you that. And they spent their whole day complaining about their wives. Like, it just made me sweat the whole day. I thought, I can't believe I'm here with you guys. I can't tell you why I was. It's just, it was just happenstance more than anything. And I thought, how can you be so damn dumb? It's like, it's certainly possible that you married barbarian witches. Fine. But you don't have, you're so lacking in sense that you would discuss that in public, not noticing that you picked them. So basically all you're doing is holding up a sign and waving it constantly that says, I'm an idiot, right? And so, well, back to responsibility. You have a responsibility to those whom you love and are obligated to ensure that they manifest themselves in a manner that's most beneficial to them over the long run. Now, you have the same responsibility, I would say, to yourself, but you'll have blind spots. Other people have to help you with that. But so the rule is, you help your wife figure out how not to make a fool of herself in public. And she extends to you the same courtesy. And it's partly maintenance of the sacred nature of the relationship. It has nothing to do with you or her, precisely. It's broader and wider than that. The idea is that if you fall into a chaotic state and everything falls apart, there's the possibility that things can come back together, including what you've just learned, in a new state. And so you can conceptualize that symbolically as the existence of the dead father at the bottom of the chaotic landscape. That's the proper way, as far as I can tell, to think about it. It's like there's something down there that's capable of reforming and re-emerging that incorporates the previous state, but that takes it farther. And you're not going to find that unless you descend into this chaotic place where it feels like all order is gone. While you generate order, it's going to be akin to the order that you had before, but there's going to be something new about it as well. So it's down to the bottom of the chaotic state to bring up what you're missing. And that's one level of analysis. Another level of analysis, you think, is, well, that's also what you're doing, that's what you should be doing in principle when you're going to university. You come to university in roughly the same state as Pinocchio. You're a bit of a puppet and you're kind of a jackass, and what the hell do you know? and it's chaotic because you haven't found your place in the world properly. And I don't mean merely for career, not that that's not relevant, because it is, but it's more important than that. It's because you're a historical creature, because you are a product of history. Unless you are enculturated properly, which means you understand your past, and in the sense that the humanities can allow for that, then you haven't been able to incorporate the wisdom of your ancestors into your day-to-day pursuits, and that's going to make you weak. That's the idea anyways. And so when you come to university, this is what university is for. It's so that you can go into the chaos and you can pull something out of it that's truly of value, and you can incorporate that in your own personality, and that makes you much, much stronger, like literally stronger, not more educated, but it's not like you know more facts. It's that you literally are a better person, and better means you can do far more things. You can articulate that's something that's of crucial importance, is that you can articulate yourself properly, which is more useful than anything else you could possibly manage. Like if you guys come out of university capable of making coherent arguments and using language properly, you're so powerful that it's ridiculous. You can lay out a strategy and pursue it successfully. And maybe the strategy is actually oriented towards something good, something that will actually work for you and work for other people as well. And I don't really understand why people aren't told this when they come to university, is that your goal is to make yourself as articulate in writing and thinking and speaking as you possibly can, because that opens the door to everything that you'll want to do in the future, no matter what it is. The more articulate person always rises, always. Because they lay out strategies more effectively. They lay out the reasons for doing something or for not doing something more particularly. They convince people, and properly so, that they can grapple with potentials that lies ahead effectively. And they can defend themselves when they're challenged. And so all of that is going into the past, into the chaos of the past, you could even say, and pulling up the spirit that inhabits that from the bottom and uniting with it. And if you don't do that, well, you're defenseless in the face of the tragedy of life. And then that's not so good, because if you're defenseless in the face of the tragedy of life, then you get way more hurt than you would otherwise get, and so do the people around you. And then the probability that you're going to be resentful and bitter about that is really high, because no one likes to fail continually. And then you get bitter and resentful, and then once you're bitter and resentful, well, being vengeful and mean is the next step. It doesn't take much of a transformation to move you from that place to the next. You think the right and left can talk to each other?
Sure.
You think they speak the same language?
Right.
So you see that fragmenting occurring. And they really are, not only are they speaking different languages, they really are speaking different languages. It's the right way of thinking about it. Yes, it's very, very dangerous. You know, I think the US worked for a long time, first of all, because it didn't always have 300 million people. It's a lot of people to put under one umbrella. Now, the utility of the American system is that it is a hierarchy, right? There's individuals, families, towns, states, underneath a somewhat loose federal structure. And that's sort of, so it's not a monolith where everyone has to speak precisely the same language. It's got some flexibility built into its structure, because it's formulated into components which have a certain amount of autonomy. And so far that's worked sufficiently well. Whether it will, and it'll probably continue to work. I mean, the Americans are a very, very robust people, and they've gone through things that are analogous to what they're going through now many times. God only knows, right? But it's a very dangerous thing to presume that the Americans are down for the count, because they have an uncanny ability to rise out from the ashes even stronger than they were before. But you can certainly see the danger lurking. In Europe, that's a different thing. Like, I think the European state is doomed, because I think it grew too fast. And it severed the connection between, like, there's not the proper hierarchy of identification. So, and people are saying, wait, Brussels, like who the hell are you guys? Why are you making decisions for us? And we don't agree with your decisions. And like, are you sure that Greece and Germany can be in the same place? Because that's by no means self-evident, right? The Germans aren't very happy about it, and the Greeks aren't very happy about it. And one of the rules for making an organization is that it's a lot easier to make a functional organization worse than it is to make a dysfunctional organization better. And so you might say, well, you've got Germany and France and England, well, let's say Germany and France, powerhouses, especially Germany, they can afford to bring Greece in. Well, maybe, but there's no evidence that they can afford it. So, I mean, Greece is unbelievably corrupt. No one pays their income tax. That's a big problem, right? And bringing them into a union at a high order has no effect whatsoever on the micro behaviors. And the thing is, the micro behaviors have to be rectified. And no one really knows how to do that. How do you stop a country where people don't pay their taxes from, how do you stop the people from not paying their taxes? Why do we pay our taxes? Who knows? We could just all of a sudden decide not to, you know, and the government wouldn't have the resources to run around gathering them all up. For one reason or another, it's become customary for people in functional Western democracies to pay their taxes. But why? Who knows? It would have been way easier for us just to do what the Greeks did and pretend to pay them, you know. So they're too big, I think. And so the people on the right are saying, back to the nation. And like, I understand why they're doing that, but the danger is the nation will subordinate the individual. And I do see it as another example of safe spaces. It's just scale's different. So, and that's why I think that the proper antidote to that, to both the chaos on the left and the order on the right, roughly speaking, is to walk the proper line in the middle. And we better do that because things are too chaotic at the moment. So it's not good. Maybe it's really good, that's possible. But we're in a state where, I really believe we're in a state where things could go any number of ways, and there's no predicting it. So, and I've never felt that, you know. I mean, I lived in the 80s, and you know, political correctness rose up in the 90s as well, and I can remember a lot of what happened in the early 70s with the oil crisis and all that. So there were times when things were shaky, but they weren't shaky the way they are now. They're an internal shakiness rather than something that was a threat that seemed to be imposed from the outside, and that's different. And it is associated with this intellectual war that's going on with postmodernism and neo-Marxism and all of that as well. So, well, so then Geppetto shows up, and he's a kindly old guy, which is pretty much exactly what you'd expect. And you know, he's a careful craftsman, and he likes kittens, and you know, that's always a good thing. And he has some fish, and you know, he's good at making things, and he's got a sense of humor, and he's kind of playful, and so he's the good father. Fundamentally, he's the wise king. He's the positive archetype of the masculine. And that's what he is. And so he's culture in its positive manifestation, and he gives rise to this creation, which is his puppet, which is what culture does, because you're a puppet of your culture. You're a marionette of your culture. And so maybe you could be more than that. And that's the other thing that's strange about this movie, and it's strange about the mythological way of looking at the world, because scientifically, deterministically, there's nature and there's culture, and you are the deterministic product of the interaction between nature and culture. There's nothing else to you than that. That's that. But the mythological world doesn't say that. It says something different. It says that there's nature and culture, and then there's you. And the you that's in there has choices and a destiny, and that you actually affect the interplay of nature and culture in determining your own character. And it insists upon that. The oldest stories we have, there's always the hero and the archetypal mother and the archetypal father. There's always those three things. There's never just two. So from the narrative perspective, there's always the implication that there's something autonomous about the hero of the story. And you know, you can't account for that. We don't have a good way of accounting for that from a scientific perspective. I was having a discussion with Sam Harris the other day, which was very, what would you say? He said we got wrapped around an axle, which is pretty much, Sam Harris is one of the four famous, you know, atheists, along with Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins and Dan Dennett, yeah, and so we were having a discussion, and he's a determinist, just right down to the bottom. It's like you're determined, there's no free will, you're a deterministic machine. And you know, if you're a coherent scientist and you're a Newtonian, roughly speaking, you don't really have much choice other than to think that way, but that isn't how it seems to people, and we don't treat each other that way. And our entire legal system is predicated on the idea that you do in fact have free will. So, well, can we account for it? Well, no. And do we have a scientific model for it? No. But then I would also say we do not have a scientific model for consciousness. We don't know a damn thing about consciousness, which is why Dan Dennett's book, which was called Consciousness Explained, was referred to by its critics as Consciousness Explained Away, which is exactly right as far as I'm concerned, because he took a mechanistic approach, and I just don't think you get to do that, because there's something really weird about consciousness. I mean, the phenomenologists like Heidegger, who tried to radically transform Western philosophy right from the bottom up, he basically said, well, you know, you can treat the world as if consciousness is primary and that human experience is reality, that's reality, and that it doesn't exist independently of consciousness in any explicable way. It's like, well, what's out there if there's nothing to experience it? Well, everything at once. It's something like that. It's not really comprehensible. As without a subject, the subject defines it and makes it real. Now, you don't have to believe that, but at least I'm telling you that there are thoroughly coherent philosophical positions that make that case very strongly, and that allow consciousness to exist as a phenomena and to take it seriously. And you certainly act like you take it seriously. You act like there's a you and that you make choices, and you certainly treat other people that way. Deterministic or not, you're still going to get angry when they're being, you know, rude to you, and you're going to act as if they had some choice in the matter. Now, maybe that's an illusion, possibly, but maybe it's not. And I would say the oldest stories that we have always include that as not only a fundamental element, but even as the fundamental element. So this is more differentiation of the archetype fundamentally. So you see the dragon of chaos here, that potential manifesting itself into this ambivalent feminine figure, both promise and threat. And then I've mapped this one out, so the ambivalent feminine figure, so sort of multivalent, gives rise to the positive mother, and then the positive mother gives birth to the hero. And that's Hercules there. And this, I like this image a lot. So Hercules is in this container, so that's you can interpret that both as something feminine, the container, but also as a representative of culture, because it's a boat that's floating on the chaotic ocean here. So that's Hercules. He has to be in a container that sustains him in the murky water of chaos. And you see, he's going out into the unknown, and he's got a lion skin on. And that's partly because one of the initiation rituals for young men, when there were lions, say in the Middle East, and that wasn't very long ago, was that you had to go out and kill a lion with a spear or with a bow and arrow or something like that. It's like, that's, you know, impressive, all things considered. I mean, you really think about that for a minute. You really want to go out and try to kill a lion with a stick? It's like, you probably wouldn't be quite the same after you did that. That would be my guess. And so anyway, so there's Hercules. He's got his lion skin on, and that shows that he's assimilated to the lion, the dominant sort of animal, and that he's also mastered it. And he's got his bow and arrow, so he's going to hit the target properly. He's someone who doesn't sin because he can hit the center of the target. And he's got this club, which I really like because it's covered with eyes, just like Marduk, the Mesopotamian hero. Well, what do you want to do when you go out into the unknown? It's like, arm yourself and pay attention. And so that's what you're trying to produce if you're a good mother, is this figure that can go out into the unknown armed, accurate, and able to pay attention. And that's a hell of a thing to participate in. It's really fun. I found having children incredibly entertaining. It's a ridiculously entertaining thing to do, because for a bunch of reasons. One is that it's the only relationship you'll ever have in your life where you actually have a chance of establishing something that's close to perfect is with your kids. Because when they're delivered to you, so to speak, they're in some sense they're perfect. And your job is to maintain that perfection if you can. And you do that by being a good parent, by being encouraging, by being on their side, by taking care of them. And you can have an absolutely pristine relationship with the child. That doesn't mean it's not full of trouble, because it is. But it can easily be the best relationship you'll ever have in your life. And in fact, I think that's It can be the worst too, and you know, sometimes you get unlucky and your child is sick mentally or physically and things fall apart and it's not your fault, and sometimes it is your fault, but it's a real gift, and you have to play this game of protection and encouragement, right? Protection and encouragement, and get that dynamic right, and then you help someone develop into something that's, well, exactly this, that can take on the trouble of the world forthrightly, and man, that's what you want. That'll make it worthwhile, that's for sure. Stalin, same thing. Stalin the great father, right? Wise man at the helm of the ship of the state. This is after the wall came down, some old man kissing a gilded statue of Stalin before it's going to be torn down. There he is with happy children, and not the children that his policies starved to death, as you might well imagine. There he is in his military uniform, sitting on what's for all intents and purposes, a throne. And this is really an uncanny one. It's very positive, right? That's Hitler or Stalin as head of state. He's in this hellish mandorla of fire, perfect, with God the Father at his head. That's Lenin, you know, who people still revere. You may know, and perhaps you don't, that I was nominated to be rector of the University of Glasgow, and so, which is an honorary position. And yesterday, the different candidates put up their manifestos, and the student newspaper put them up and then wrote analysis of the manifestos, which were biased, and they were appallingly biased and one-sided. And I wrote and told them that. They said, well, we have a perfect right to our political opinion. And I thought, yeah, well, for sure, but you know, you are journalists after all, and maybe you could be just trying to tell what's happening. It's like, no, there's none of that. And they said that one of the candidates that they clearly recommended, who seems to be a person who's perfectly heroic in his own right. I mean, he's taken on very many difficult legal cases and worked for the oppressed and downtrodden who clearly exist. It was either him or another candidate, doesn't really matter, that they described as bolshy and outspoken. Bolshy meaning Bolshevik-like. It's like, well, you know, he's appropriately bolshy. It's like, it's no different than saying, well, he's appropriately Nazi-like. Like, what the hell is that? I mean, there were 50 million people that were killed in the Soviet Union by the Bolsheviks, and maybe twice that many in China. And that says nothing about Cambodia and all the other places there were radical left bloodbaths. You think it's cute to call someone Bolshe? Jesus, it's appalling. It's appalling. It's not some fashionable thing that you do. It's a participation in some of the deepest intellectual morasses of evil that human beings have ever managed to create, and yet it's fashionable. It shows you what the universities are worth. Well, there's the downside of Stalin. Yeah, as Stalin as hangman. That sort of cartoon would have got you killed in the Soviet Union. There's Stalin as Satan himself in a stained glass representation. There's a statue of Stalin covered with red paint for the blood after the wall came down. There's Stalin as what it's very much like Modina's Satan, right? You look at that, and it's exactly the same archetypal idea. There's the Americans going cap in hand to get a little largesse from Papa Stalin. That's a painting of the communists forcibly collectivizing the productive farmers in the Soviet Union in the early 1920s, the kulaks, right? Everything from whom they stole and raped them and murdered them and shipped them off to Siberia and killed them and wiped out the productive farmers of the Soviet Union, and then starved 6 million Ukrainians to death. And there's some poor kid in the 1930s whose ribs are showing, you know, taking a bath in this pot with his eyes wide, and you know, he's one of the fortunate ones because he's still alive. It's like Bolshe, yeah, cute, pretty, fun, fashionable, lovely.